information and then ask questions and answers. And לפי דעתי יש מישהו כאן, אולי, אני לא יודע, שיש לה שאלות אולי איזה קצת חריף או משהו כזה, אז...
מאיזה כיוון? מימין או משמאל?
מימין. ימין.
Always.
Right, so...
And she represents whom?
Just herself.
Oh. Like an organization?
No.
No. Okay.
But that's okay. So...
But everyone knows her for being that person?
No, I don't know. I don't know if they do, but I don't even know who she is. She's not going to say, but when she found out, it was awful that you say that you can't get yourself. But if you ever talk like that, it starts on your emails and don't come unless you act like it. So, but I don't know who she is. So if that happens, we'll stop it. I'll introduce you one of the people. So
unless she can be provocative and
provocative. Provocative. Like there can be. That's great, but not disrespectful, right? And you don't have to worry about that. If someone does that, you're preaching to the choir here, more or less. But obviously,
so they know quite a lot about Israel. The people who came.
This is a crowd that seems to know a lot, but I wouldn't assume necessarily everything. I think a lot of people are... Hi.
Hi, I'm Daniel.
Oh, hi, Daniel. I saw your piece in the Times of Israel. Yeah, you did a nice job.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Brian Schuldenfrei. Yeah, and so anyway, I mean, nothing, outlandish, but we could bring an extra security guard.
Yes, I saw.
Yeah.
I thought, is there any security issue?
He's a former Marine. It's better to be over-prepared. And then, so it should be a nice crowd. And I think we probably lost a lot of people because of the weather in Los Angeles. So it's actually being live. It's being live streamed.
Oh.
So this is everyone.
On your Facebook or
Zoom? I'm not. It's not Zoom. קוראים את זה live stream, משום שזה משהו מיוחד. So it's, I guess it'll be on our...
Facebook or on your website?
It'll probably be on the website, yeah. So, we're actually here, so someone's doing that right now. They're watching it from Aloha, watching from the beach. Waving to you. She's in Hawaii.
Oh.
There, wave.
In Hawaii?
Yeah.
Hopefully she has better weather.
This is Lena.
So I just wanted to say, I put over there to a sign-up sheet.
Oh, great.
And I'll put another one too, because they're quite
sure
here. For updates, all of what you said, everything with the
That's great.
It's great.
Great.
It's a great thing.
So good evening, everyone. We're going to begin. For those of you who are our guests this evening, my name is Brian Schuldenfrei, and I'm one of the rabbis here at Ariel. And it's our pleasure to welcome you here to our community. I know we have many friends from Ramat Zion, care of Rabbi Ehud Sela, who has joined us. So everyone say hello to Rabbi Sela. He is the Rav of Northridge. And it's good to have our friends from Ramat Zion with us. And then we also, I've already been getting texts. We have a number of people who are watching. We actually have an audience from as far away as Hawaii, where Lena and Mark LeBeau are watching. Everyone say, hi, Lena. I know. So they left. They were smart to leave, but we know we also have a lot of other people who are watching in Sherman Oaks and Valley Village because a drizzle in Los Angeles makes everyone stand still. I want to begin this evening by sharing that my wife actually, as we speak, is in flight to Israel. And she, which is either the mark of her Zionist dedication or her madness, is taking 17 sixth graders to Israel. I know. So for many of them, this is their first time in Israel. And I was thinking this afternoon about my first time, or my first few times in Israel. And my first time in Israel, it was a lot like, I like using this phrase, Disneyland with falafel. Everything was perfect. Everything was shiny. Zionism, antiquity, it all came alive. Judaism, the way it was, the way it possibly could be reimagined. It was incredible. It was an intoxicating experience. And as I matured, I began, every time I returned to Israel, to gain a greater appreciation of Israel as a great experiment, a place where Judaism could coexist with democracy. What a unique societal experiment to both hold Judaism and democracy sacrosanct, and to experiment and to live that sometimes tense balance between the two. But that too, in its own way, from a more mature perspective, was intoxicating and tremendously exciting. But I wonder what these kids are going to experience when they land in but a few hours and they go into a country that's afraid of what tomorrow is going to look like, afraid if there will be a tomorrow. A country in which primacy has been given to a very specific brand of Judaism, and a country in which democracy is very much threatened. And I wonder what they're going to come home with, these sixth graders. And I wonder what their attachment to the land or to the country will be. And I wonder about my kids, one in 8th grade, one in 7th grade, and one in 4th grade. And what are they going to think about Israel? And what's going to be their connection? And I wonder about our kids and our grandkids. And I wonder about several of our high school students who are here with us today. What's the future of this beautiful dream that we had realized? In my office right now, there's a handful of 7th graders who are studying with Rabbi Holtzman. At the end of the month of April, we are going to be hosting an exhibit here at Adat Ariel. It's the largest collection of Theodor Herzl memorabilia in the world. And our 7th graders are going to serve as the docents to that exhibit. So they are going to, for the fourth Friday program at the month of April, to mark Yom HaAtzmaut, they are going to be the docents of the Theodore Herzl memorabilia. And of course, I just heard Rabbi Holtzman say this, Im tirtzu ein zo agada. If you dream it, it can be realized. It's not the matter of legends, but it can be realized into reality. But are we experiencing dreams anymore, or are we experiencing nightmares? And that's the matter with which we've come here this evening to discuss the future of our beloved state of Israel. And perhaps no other person is more qualified to address what's going on and what we can possibly do about it than our guest speaker, Dr. Yizhar Hess, who I could talk about his contributions to Haaretz and to his advocacy, first in the Masorti movement and now as a leader in the World Zionist Organization. But I think more than hear about him, we should hear from him. So without further ado, in just a moment, we're going to introduce our guest speaker, but we would be remiss before we introduce Dr. Hess if we didn't begin the evening formally by recognizing that people ask me, especially the kids, about, like, do we just go away from Israel? Well, we would no sooner turn our back on Israel than we would turn our back on this country, right? That there have been policies and there have been governments that we have disagreed with, and there's not, unanimity here in terms of what we disagree with and whom we disagree with, but we all agree that we have a fidelity for our country. And I like to say that we do have a fidelity towards our state of Israel. And so recognizing that special relationship, that special bond that we as Jews enjoy with our homeland and that we also enjoy with our country, please rise for our national anthems.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous night o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Kolod baleva penima nefesh Yehudi homia ulefate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od lovda tikvateinu hatikva bachnot alpayim li חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים.
Thank you, Rabbi, for the important introduction, and thank you, Cantor, for that moving. Maybe I'll hold it. It's okay.
Yeah, sure.
And if I move,
Yeah, that'll be better.
יופי. ערב טוב, good evening, everyone. ערב טוב. As it was said, my name is Yizhar, and I'm the vice chairman of the World Zionist Organization. And before I begin, I'd like to thank you for electing me to my position. I was elected by the World Zionist Congress just 2.5 years ago. I'm the senior representative of Merkaz. It's the Masorti conservative slate to the Congress, and all of you who voted for the Congress, thank you. It's important. This is a round table that represents many Jews from all over the world, Israel, North America, and the rest of the world, in a way that allows us to speak about values and about the assets of the Jewish people, things that we have in the national institutions. And I'd like to start this conversation about the current situation in Israel that is bothering. To say it's bothering, it's the understatement of the century, okay? But I will talk about it in a second, but I'd like to start, Rabbi, with Herzl. You mentioned Herzl, and I think it's a perfect way to open this discussion, because the founder of political Zionism set, I think, an infrastructure that is relevant up until today. You know, Zionism did not start in Herzl. The Zionist movement began before Herzl. Historians take the year 1882 as the year that modern Zionism began. This is the first wave of Aliyah to Israel. So Herzl did not invent Zionism. He joined the Zionist movement. And actually, the Zionist Congress was, by the way, in which year? 1897, where? Basel. Everyone remembers, in Basel, Switzerland. But why Basel? From all places, why Basel? What? Neutral country. A neutral, it's a very good guess. Some other ideas, why Basel? Good hotels, good convention center. The what? I didn't hear. I must tell you, it's great, intelligent guests. You know, we heard. You know, it's may sound relevant that the neutrality of Switzerland, the fact that it's Herzl didn't want Basel. Basel is a small, unimportant city. It was back then not important, and today it's not important. I just visited Basel a few months ago because we celebrated 125 years for the first Zionist Congress. It's a nice city because it's in Switzerland, and Switzerland is nice, but it's not an important city, and Herzl didn't want Basel. Herzl wanted Munich. Herzl was the leading political correspondent of the Neue Freie Presse. It's the New York Times of that time, okay, the Vienna newspaper, and he knew something about history, about politics, and he knew that Munich, sophisticated Munich, posh Munich, is the right place to have that convention. Why couldn't he have it in Munich? Excuse me, rabbis? It's due to the rabbis. The rabbis, all of them, Orthodox, Reform, and the beginning of conservative Judaism, wrote a proclamation to the authorities of Munich and asked them to ban the option of having this radical convention of Jews who think that Jews should have a sovereign state in Palestine. So weird, so unrealistic, so dangerous for the Jewish destiny. They asked the authorities to ban it. Herzl was smart enough not to pick that fight. He had enough fights, and he set his sights and went to Basel. So Basel was picked because Herzl was able to have that convention in Basel and to start the political element of modern Zionism. And actually, another anecdote, I think, about Herzl, because you are having here the memorabilia. I think it's David Metallo collection from Toronto. So Herzl came to Basel just a few days before the event. And he planned it for less than a year. And as you can imagine, it wasn't easy to plan an international convention without seeing the place, without visiting the place first, without emails and Excel spreadsheets. It was like planning a big event. And he came to Basel just a few days before the event, and the first thing that he wanted to see, in a minute you'll understand why, was the venue that he rented without seeing it. He couldn't visit the website. And he went to the place and he saw it's not the right place to have that kind of convention, because Herzl, his passion was not journalism, was definitely writing, but not writing to the press, but playwriting. Herzl was a serious playwright. His biggest dream was to be one of the most famous playwriters in Europe of his time. He wrote more than 20 plays. Some of them were even staged. None of them was successful, and it frustrated him quite a lot. So in a way, he surrendered to journalism. Quite successful journalist, but he surrendered to it. But his passion to theater definitely helped him. He came to the place. It wasn't the right venue. He canceled the reservation. He rented the most sophisticated, posh theater that Basel had then. It was the Stad Casino. By the way, Herzl burned his family fortune on Zionism. And he rented that place, and for the next few days, he decorated it. He wanted to give a sense to the delegates that something new is starting, a Jewish convention that never played in the same way, with decorum, with a presidential kind of protocol that would allow people to imagine what is it to have a sovereign state. And one of the nice things that he really invested in it in the invitations to the opening session, Sunday morning, 1897, August 29th. It was written that you need to come with a frock. Frock, it's the German word for a tuxedo. So it was a tuxedo with a tail, high hat, a bow tie, a white bow tie. That was the dress code, and he was serious about it. 10 a.m. Sunday morning, who wears a tuxedo? His deputy, Dr. Max Nordau. We have this big Nordau Street in Tel Aviv, so the deputy of Herzl, I'm now serving in his role, sitting on Max Nordau's chair, so he was a giant, I'm not a giant, he's a giant in any given way in our history. So even Max Nordau felt that Herzl wasn't serious. He came with the light suit for that morning. Herzl was standing in the entrance, saw him coming, sent him back to the hotel to dress like he should have, and he came back. And people who knew Herzl before the Congress noticed that he changed during the Congress. The way he looked, the way he moved on stage, the way he conducted conversations. He was presidential. He grew to be Herzl during the 3 days of the Congress, and you need to remember, some of the delegates came to the Congress to dispute him. They wanted to argue with Herzl. They didn't like his ideas. And they were all but one, not all of them, but most of them, they were taken by the idea and by that experience that Herzl took them through. They could fail, that something new is starting, and all the rest of history. The number of delegates who came to the first Congress was 209. Not that many. Okay, you know, Zionism was a dream of just a few. And now look, 126 years afterwards and 75 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, how successful this idea is and was. And what Herzl brought to Zionism, again, he didn't invent Zionism, he joined the movement. What he did, he politicized the idea. He brought politics into the idea, and he was so successful in politicizing the idea that less than 50 years after he passed away in 1904 at the young age of 44, okay, so he led the Zionist movement for 7 years only, and he was Zionist for 8 years. Before that, he wasn't. Okay, so for the 7 years that he led the Zionist movement, he was so successfully politicizing the idea in a way that allowed that mechanism that he left behind to create and to establish the state less than 50 years after he passed away. Now, one of the core elements, one of the key elements, one of the sacred values that Herzl and Nordo brought to the table in the first Congress was the fact that they insisted that it would be a democracy, that it would be a democratic entity, a political democratic entity. From the second Congress on, from the first, everyone were invitees. Everyone who wanted to come and thought they should be there were invited to be there. From the second Congress on, you had to be elected. The homework that Herzl gave the delegates when they left, you need to go back to your city, to your hometown, to the place you come from, to establish a Zionist organization, a Zionist federation, to be elected. And for the second Congress on, you are Shliach Tzibur. You are elected by a constituency that sent you to represent them. Very important thing in any democracy. Secondly, women's rights. Zionism was one of the first, if not the first, political entity, political movement that allowed equal rights to women. Women could vote and women could be elected. From the second Congress. There were women in the first one, but they weren't elected. From the second, it was obvious. So from the very first, and this is a reason to be proud of Zionism regardless of anything else, of course. In other democracies, when did women get the right to vote and to be elected? Here in the States, 1920. Exactly, in Switzerland. Wyoming, 1870. Okay, I didn't know. In Switzerland, by the way, 1972. So it's the latest democracy that gave women that right. Interesting enough. Okay, some things that I think that me as a Zionist, as a devoted Zionist, as someone who speaks Hebrew and who dreams in Hebrew, I think that the fact that the Zionist movement was a democratic entity from the very beginning gives me a big sense of pride. Now, I chose to open in that context because I'd like to speak today about something that I'm afraid that might be taken, and we need to be on guard regarding that thing. I'd like to speak with you in a very blunt way, in a very from the bottom of my heart, because I'd like, in spite of the fact that I'm not now in Israel, I'm speaking to people that are not Israeli citizens, I think that you have a stake in this game. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And for the very first beginning of that state, from the way I was raised in a kindergarten, we were taught that Israel doesn't belong only to the Jews who live in Israel or to the citizens of Israel, Jews or not Jews, but also to Jews all over the world. This is the nation state of the Jewish people. This is our homeland. And what we learned from Navi Yeshayahu, from Prophet Isaiah, is that Leman Zion lo echeshe. For the sake of Zion, I will not be quiet. And we are in this formative moment in our history where it's not only our ability, it's our duty not to be silent. I want to talk politics. Politics is something that Herzl taught us that we should not look down on. Okay, it's a vehicle that exercises values, and I'm worried about the way those values are being played in Israel today. I'd like to criticize my government. I think this is the right time to do such a thing out of love to Israel. It's not talking against Israel, it's talking for Israel. It's not talking against Zionism, it's advocating for Zionism, because we are experiencing unprecedented times. I'd like to start just less than 3 months ago. We had the 5th round of elections in Israel after a 2.5 troubling years with a few rounds of elections, when the Israeli public could not agree, by the way people voted, about a coalition that would have stability. And yet this time, in the last round of elections, it looked like as if there will be a stable coalition. The Israeli public was talking very clearly. The Israeli public said, by the way they voted to the Knesset, that they would like to see a right-wing coalition. Actually, it's the first time in Israel's history to have such an homogenic coalition of right-wing, extreme right-wing, with Orthodox parties and extreme Orthodox parties. All together, a homogenic kind of coalition that we never had before. It's true that if you count the popular vote, you might see a different picture. But as we know, in other countries as well, the popular vote has its importance, but this is not what counts. The results of the elections were quite clear. 64 mandates to that coalition. In the Knesset, we have 120 seats, so 64 is a majority. Some of us understood immediately that it would mean that some of the ministers that will be appointed to this government are ministers that would be a stain on our identity as Israelis. They were elected in a democratic way, but it doesn't mean that we should be proud of them. And some of them definitely give us the sense that we are ashamed that they were elected, like Ben Gvir. I'm sure that you heard the name more than once. A minister that is today serving as our Homeland Security Minister. He was taken to trial more than 50 times. He was convicted 8 times. Some of the felonies are connected to terror, regarding terror against Palestinians. Not an easy thing to digest, but still, he's not my cup of tea. But he was elected in a democratic way, and these elections, the results were never contested. Rightly, they were never contested. Okay, this is how democracy functions. So we said, okay, it's not a regular kind of a coalition. We were even more worried when we saw the coalition agreements that they signed. In some of those agreements, some things that for years were only talked, now they were written and they were promised to be legislated. Discriminatory legislation against reform and conservative converts, canceling officially the Kotel deal, legislating draft bill that would release the Haredim from the responsibility to serve in the army, to put it in writing and to vote on it, not easy things. And we were certain that in the next few years, the people who fight and who advocate, who love Israel and like to see it more open society and more pluralistic, that we will have to fight these legislations like we do, in every open society, in the Knesset, via the court, in the streets. Okay, we have experience with those things. We were certain that these would be the issues that we will be dealing with. We never imagined, not for one single moment, that we will be dealing with the severe issues that Israel is now facing. And we had good reason not to imagine it. It wasn't part of the Likud campaign. Netanyahu did not run to his office advocating for the changes that he's now trying to implement. As a matter of fact, in the day that his government was sworn in, he convened the heads of the coalition and he talked publicly about the key elements that he will be doing in this in his government. And he spoke about, as you can imagine, he spoke about Iran. Okay, Netanyahu did a career over his fight against the nuclear bomb in Iran, and he spoke about it, how dramatic it is, how important it is. He spoke about the cost of living in Israel, a big issue. It's expensive to live in Israel. Everyone who visited Israel knows how expensive Israel is. Thriving economy, a rich country with a very expensive prices for each cup of coffee or for renting an apartment, a serious issue. A third thing that he was talking about, the governance in the Negev, the fact that our police having challenges to enforce the law in the Negev. Serious thing. It was, all these elements were part of Bibi Netanyahu's campaign. So he talked about it, and it was obvious. 2 weeks later, we get to see his Minister of Justice introducing a dramatic reform in our judicial system. And when we got to learn the details, we understood that it's far from being a judicial reform. It's practically a regime change. An attempt to change the rules of the game of Israel's democracy in a way that really changed the democratic nature of our country. Now, Israel doesn't have, as we all know, doesn't have a constitution. This is something that David Ben-Gurion did not do, unfortunately. You know, he's an important, he was an important statesman and a fine politician. One thing that he neglected of doing was having a constitution to legislate that the Declaration of Independence, that is such a pure democratic text. The fact that they didn't legislate it as a constitution, it's a mistake, but nevertheless, it wasn't done. And Israel doesn't have a protected Bill of Rights as well. Okay, so in such a fragile kind of democratic infrastructure, every change in the rules of the game is a constitutional change, even though we don't have a constitution. It's not a paradox when you get to understand that these are the basic rules of the games. Another thing to remember about Israel is that in most democracies we have three agencies: the parliament, the government, and the court. In Israel, we never had three agencies. From the very beginning, we had only two, because the linkage, the ties, the connections between the government and the parliament, it's basically like one. Most of the ministers, in some governments, all the ministers are also members of the parliament. It means that practically 99% of anything that the government would like to legislate, the government can legislate. Okay, so we don't have three agencies. We do have two agencies, the parliament and the court, and it was balanced quite well. Okay, we did have checks and balances with the two agencies, but you know, a strong two agencies that could balance each other when needed. Not that often, not every day, but when needed. Now, what they introduced, and I will touch on three elements of this judicial reform or regime change. There are many elements. I will touch only three that, in my eyes, represents the serious of the matters, as well as are easy to comprehend, easy to understand. First thing is the legal advisors. In Israel, the top professionals of the government, it's civil service people, you know, civil servant, that are not being changed every time the government changes. And in each ministry, there is a legal advisor that is appointed not by the minister, but is appointed for terms or for, you know, it depends. In each time it depends, for a few years, regardless of the minister that is there. And he, of course, needs to help the minister to implement his policy or her policy, but he, of course, he bows to the law. This is his ethics. It's not always easy to a minister to have a legal advisor that tells him sometimes, listen, on that, it's not legal. On that, I'm not sure that it's defendable in court. I'm not sure that it goes along with our basic laws. It's not an easy thing, but this is what the legal advisor does. This new legislation wants to change it, that each minister, when he or she enters the ministry, they will able to hire a private lawyer with a relationship of a client and a lawyer, okay, that kind of ethics that is important for criminal law, it's important for business law, that kind of ethics, and that lawyer would help the minister to implement its policy in a way that a private lawyer does when he has a client. It changes dramatically the nature of the civil service in Israel. Okay, it's not an easy thing. These, I'm not sure how to, איך מתרגמים שומרי סף? Guards keepers? Gatekeepers, נכון, שומרי סף, it's exactly, okay. Gatekeepers, these are the gatekeepers of Israel's democracy, so they want to change it. A second thing has to do with our parliament. To legislate a clause that would allow the parliament to cancel the ruling of the Supreme Court. So if the Supreme Court decides that something is not legal, because of various reasons, because it's against our basic law for human dignity that allows the court to cancel laws. So if the court rules something that the government doesn't like, they can bring it to the Knesset, and with the regular majority of 61, that ruling would be cancelled. It's an override clause. Something that basically ends the independence and the credibility and the nature of what is a judicial system. Okay, it needs to interpret the law, and something it's not legal, we have a problem. And it's not in a royal majority, like one would think, okay, the parliament was elected by the people, so not in a regular majority, but in a royal majority of 80? Okay, one can come to understand that that might be, no, in a regular majority of 61. A regular majority of 61, any government must have in order to be sworn in. Okay, it's not basically the one element that was so essential of checks and balances between our two agencies will be destroyed. The third thing is the most dangerous thing. The third thing is something that not by coincidence, this is something that this government is fighting over very, very aggressively, even when they understand that the hundreds of thousands rallying in the streets would not allow, the big campaign that they are trying to launch. This is the thing that they are most determined to do, is the committee that elects the judges. In Israel from 1950, 51 or 52, I think 50, the committee that elects judges to the Supreme Court, until 1950, it was the government that elected the judges. In the beginning of Israel's democracy, this is how it worked. Together with Begin and the Labor Party of back then, they legislated an idea that makes so much sense. A committee that would elect the judges, each and every judge to each and every court, is a committee of 9 people. 3 Supreme Court judges, 2 representatives of the bar, and 4 politicians. By the way, 3 politicians from the coalition and 1 from the opposition. This is the way this committee worked for decades. In order to elect a judge, you need to have a consensus of 7. So it means that you need to negotiate, you need to bring consensus, you need this is a good way to elect a very good Supreme Court. And indeed, Israel's Supreme Court is one of the jewels in our crown, in the crown of our democracy. The rulings of the Supreme Court in Israel are often quoted in other judicial systems, because some of the analysis is as bright as it could be. It's a scholarly oriented, known Supreme Court with fine judges. Now, the government is not pleased with this committee because of various accusations. Most of them are not correct, okay, and they want to change it to have the committee with a majority to the coalition. It means that the head of the coalition, the prime minister, will be basically electing the judges. It means that within 1 or 2 years, because some judges are retiring, we will have a Supreme Court that some of its members would owe their nomination to the Prime Minister, and coincidentally or not coincidentally, they will be the judges, or some of them, that will be sitting on the appeal of his cases when he appeals on the verdict of his own indictments when time comes. Drama. Drama, it is really something that is unprecedented in the boldness of creating a change, a constitutional change, even without allowing a process of a public debate that takes its time. They want to finish the legislation or the core elements until Pesach. So it means that in the next 10 days, everything needs to be legislated. This is their goal. In order to make sure that they are able to govern. Now, there is a myth, really it's a myth, that the Supreme Court in Israel is so powerful, took power that never anyone gave it. So firstly, the Knesset gave the power to the Supreme Court, okay, the two basic laws that gave the ability to the Supreme Court to cancel laws were legislated in 1992 in the Knesset. So there are 3 decades that these laws are in place. Not only that, when you come to analyze how many times in our history the Supreme Court canceled laws, you end up with a ridiculous number of 22. Only 22 laws out of thousands of laws that were legislated were canceled by the Supreme Court. It's ridiculous. And the governments of Israel were quite powerful, okay? They could launch campaigns, okay, go to war. They could sign peace agreements, which they did. They did multiple things that any government could do, because this is the way. And they were restrained in certain issues, like it should do. You know, a government is always powerful. The powers is within the government. So who would be restrained if not the government? And who would do it if it's not the court? It's dramatic because we see what happened. We saw what happened in the world in the last few years to several democracies, that some of them were thriving democracies. The democracy of Poland was a democracy to look up to, really, and see how quickly it changed. Hungary, the same. Turkey, in a different process, the same. In all of these democracies, it wasn't a process that was pushed like in a blitzkrieg of legislation for just a few weeks. It took a process. You know, they did it in a way that I didn't like, that no one liked, that the people who defended democracy in these countries didn't like, but at least it was a process that it wasn't something that was pushed in such an aggressive way to change the nature of the country. Secondly, the populistic leaders, they did it in those countries, had a vast support of the public. It wasn't like, fragments of 1% that gave a majority, that you see the half of the country is crying out loud. No, they had, when Urban, he had, I think, 60 or 65 approval rate of the public when he did the horrible things that he did to the democracy of Hungary. Here in Israel, it's not the case. Now you analyze the polls that shrank dramatically the coalition of Bibi. Right? It's polls, it's not elections, but still it gives you a sense. And B, you see the numbers, the hundreds of thousands that are rallying in the streets. We never had such big demonstrations in Israel. Never, ever. Okay? 500,000 Israelis last Motzai Shabbat. And you see the energy. And you see the different sectors that are represented there. People who serve on the reserves, the doctors, the academia, the Sfaradim v'Ashkenazim, religious and non-religious, all standing together, carrying the Israeli flag. Carrying the Israeli flag, not coming to the streets out of love to Israel, reclaiming the flag, talking on behalf of Zionism, on behalf of Herzl. I just saw this Motzei Shabbat in Like many creative posters, people are writing posters. So it's some of the things are really. I saw a picture of Herzl crying, with a big with a big tear on his cheek, because this is the sense is that we feel that the house is burning. Sometimes, some nights, I wake up at 2 a.m., I look to my right, I see my wife, we are both awake. Out of stress, out of a feel that it's hard to breathe, because, good God, something that we never imagined that would happen to our beloved country, to our democracy, to our thriving open society with its flaws. Like any democracy, we talked for years for religion and state and the obstacles that we were all facing. Nothing to compare. It becomes marginal to the big aspects, to the big thing that we are now coping with. Another thing that struck me a few weeks ago in Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv, I saw Aryeh Naor. Professor Aryeh Naor was the secretary of the first government of Menachem Begin. And he was there in the street with a flag. He's at his 90s, I think. And it was obvious to him that he should be there, like many others that didn't vote ever to the parties that Aryeh Naor voted for. So you get that Israel is A, in the middle of a nightmare, like you said, Rabbi. This is definitely a nightmare. And B, it's like it's taken by forces that, yes, they were elected democratically, but are not acting democratically. Now, as you can imagine, this is a big dilemma. If a government is elected in a democratic way, and it was elected in a democratic way, what are the tools that the opposition in the Knesset and the people of Israel, what are the legit tools that they have in their hands in order to prevent a disaster to change the country? A big dilemma. The coalition says, and it has merit when they say it, hey, you do not respect the results of the elections. We won. We are the majority. We are the people. The people elected us. That's true. But as we know, democracy is not only about majority. Yes, it's a key element. Without it, but it's not only about majority. The tyranny of the majority, it's also something that you need to remember. The majority could be a tyrant, if it doesn't respect minority rights, if it doesn't respect the checks and balances, if it doesn't make sure, the majority, if it doesn't make sure that the court is strong and independent. These are altogether the core elements of liberal democracy, because there is no other than liberal democracy to be a democracy. In other countries, there are elections. Does it mean that they are democracies? No, it's definitely a condition that needs to be, but it's not the only condition. So what can we do? That's a big dilemma, and I think you can see it from week to week, how the demonstrations are escalating, how people got to a point where they push the envelope, even push the envelope to places they never thought they would. And I'm not talking about running to Ayalon and blocking the road, which is, it's important because it gets to the news, and that's not really pushing the envelope. But the fact that there is a petition of pilots, IDF pilots, high-ranked pilots, that said, listen, if it happens, we will not be able to come to reserves to defend our country. Who would thought that will get there? The number of people from other units as well that rose. Some of those units are critical units. Critical units, even if it comes to a decision of Israel making something in Iran. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu is in a position that if he wants to launch a campaign against Iran, he cannot. He cannot, because everyone would think that he does it in order to take the attention to Iran. So I get a feeling, I never heard it from anyone officially, that the head of the Air Force, the general who's the head of the Air Force, will tell him, listen, I'm not sure that my people will be able to do so. Because the IDF is mostly based on reserve people. So it's those pilots are coming every week. You know, they're living their lives, but one day a week they dedicated for years to fly the aircrafts of the IDF. It's a serious kind of commitment. So it touches Israel's security in a significant way. Other aspects is the economy. You see already how the market replies to the situation. You hear people, you know, taking their assets out of Israel. Companies that are not investing anymore. Some companies already declared, and I'm talking about companies of billions, that declares that they are taking their cash flow outside of Israel to other places. I can hear people, you know, friends of mine that are thinking for the first time in their life about opening a bank account outside of Israel, just to make sure, as if Zionism was not to win this paradigm that we are running from places that we have sof a home to be at. So I'm emotional because this is the nature of where we are. And the dilemma of what can be done is definitely a dilemma that we are facing every day. I think that the escalation that we see is in place. The people who do it out of love to Israel. You get to hear almost everyone, 99% of everyone whose opinion counts in Israel, on the same kind of line, on the same page, how dangerous it is. I'm talking about former heads of the Mossad, former heads of the Shin Bet, Shabak, former heads of the committee for our nuclear committee. This is how it's called, the head of the, he just interviewed last week in the paper and spoke very dramatically about the feel that he has. Now, he is the person who holds the biggest secrets of the state of Israel, okay? And he was never interviewed. He wanted to be interviewed, to say on record, and it was in Yediot Achronot, the biggest daily, in the weekend edition, that he's afraid from a dictatorship. And he said, my parents made Aliyah to Israel from Romania. I grew up in a ma'abara. He gave his biography, his entire life he dedicated for the state of Israel. He said, this is too dangerous not to speak up against. The immediate past head of the Shin Bet did the same, and he spoke about dictatorship. He was interviewed in the television, I think last week. And he spoke about it very bluntly. Now, he is appointee, the one from both of them are appointees of Bibi Netanyahu, not of anyone else. They are not that, no. He appointed them. They respect him. They thought, both of them, that he's a very serious, dedicated, sensitive, and not, a serious leader. And they say, hey, something here changed in a way that we cannot defend it anymore. So I'm not exaggerating when I stand here in front of you today saying that, listen, we are in unprecedented times. And I have confidence, at least I had confidence, that it won't end with the bloodshed. But I heard my president last Wednesday, when he introduced his a platform for a compromise. By the way, not an ideal compromise, but a reasonable one, a responsible one, I think I can live with and others can live with. Not that it's okay. It took 7 minutes to the government to reject it. 7 minutes. When President Herzog said, if you think it would not, he said, if you think we are not that close to bloodshed, you are wrong. You have no clue. הוא אמר, אין לכם מושג. You have no clue how close we are to bloodshed. Because he sees the intelligence report. And I was stunned because I really felt that we are not close to bloodshed, okay? It's serious. Now, we know that democracies, it's when they go to this path, it's not an easy path to come back alive from, okay? Now, what can we do? So firstly, we Israelis, we do what needs to be done. We are, all over, things that we are demonstrating in a radical way, really in a radical way. Under the house of the Minister of Justice, under the house of the Dichter, and under the house of each and every ministers, we make sure that they hear us. We try to work in whatever way, with the big demonstrations, small demonstrations. So we are working as much as it's possible, and it's not the opposition in the Knesset. Okay, it's really from grassroots kind of thing. We donate money. Personally, my family donated over 10,000 shekels already in the last few weeks in order to make sure that the demonstrations are it costs money to whatever. It's a big infrastructure. Many things, I think, can be done from your side of the ocean as well. Okay, and it's important to do, I think, because of the reason that we are. So speak up. No, you have to speak up. You meaning to speak up, to say it, to talk about it, to make sure that you are heard. Don't be shy. Yeah, I will. I'll share with you what I think that you can do. So speaking up, writing to the editors of the newspapers, is talking with your friends here, with your friends in Israel, is important. Don't feel that the fact that you don't live in Israel and you never served in its army, that you don't have the right, the duty to speak out loud and clear. Israel democracy was highly affected by people in North America, billionaires, who wanted to change Israel democracy. Sheldon Adelson of Las Vegas invested billions already in creating a daily, Yisrael Hayom, that promotes right-wing idea. It's legal, no problem. But he came from North America, invested the billions, and surely in 15 years, created a big shift in the public opinion towards the right. It's legit. It's not illegit, but definitely, even if you don't have if he has the ability to do so because of his money, definitely each and every one of you have the ability to cry out loud and to speak up with, don't be shy. Even this reform was introduced to the Minister of Justice and others by Forum Kohelet. Forum Kohelet is funded by two billionaires here in the US, Daniel, what's their name? Danchik and? Yes, Danchik and? Sess. Big donors to the far right elements of the Republican Party here in the US, created that think tank, a smart, sophisticated think tank that funds scholarships to the university, that tutors PhD students, that does, what a good thing can do. What some democracies did to other countries that are not democracies, that when they wanted to create regime changes in these countries. Okay, so the fact that some billionaires here were able to do so, unfortunately from the liberal side, not that many. There are billionaires, but they never did what those billionaires did, means that definitely you shouldn't be shy when you are talking about it. Secondly, lobby with your local federation. They should hear it. I know that some federations took an active voice. I'm proud of JFNA, who wrote a few weeks ago a very strong statement that was heard well in Israel. Our movement, the Masorti movement, worldwide, all the parts of the Masorti movement, the Rabbinical Assembly, USCJ, the Seminario in Buenos Aires, JTS, Ziegler, everyone, wrote a very harsh statement, a very strong statement about Israel's democracy and how dangerous it is for the relationship of Israel with its allies and with Jewish communities worldwide, if God forbid this legislation would be legislated. So lobby with local institutions, it's important, federation specifically. Another vehicle that I'm speaking very cautiously about, okay, I know that it's a serious thing to do, and I wouldn't say to do so on any other thing. On that, I think it's legit. is engaging with your elected officials, senators and congressmen. The ones that love Israel, the ones that supported Israel. You can do it via AIPAC or not via AIPAC, or directly, but make sure that the ones that you know that always supported Israel, that they are aware that you, as their constituency, are worried. Try to engage them, to pick up the phone, to call to their peers in Israel, to the people that they know, to the movers and shakers, and make sure that they hear how worried they are strategically about the relationship of Israel and its biggest ally, the US, when it comes to changes of the democratic nature of the state. The fact that your president picked up the phone a few days ago and called Netanyahu is important. The fact that he didn't invite him to the US is important. The fact that these kind of conversations has a potential to change things is also something to remember, because Netanyahu, he's used to deal with these kinds of tensions, okay? Other MKs, other ministers, especially ministers that have relations, that grew up in systems that respected those relationships. You know, we have the Minister of Agriculture, his name is Avi Dichter. Avi Dichter grew up in the Shabak. He was the head of the Shabak. It's like the Israeli FBI. He knows strategically how important the relationship of Israel and the US are. So if there are people who could influence him, engage with him, politicians and others, it's important. Our Minister of Defense, Gallant, also grew up in the army. He's a general. Okay, he was the head of Shayetet 13. It's like Delta Force of Israel. He's a serious person. Okay, if he could hear that kind of, and those communications with them sometimes are more important than with Bibi, because Bibi, you know, he knows how to deal with AIPAC, with JFNA. He is, you know, he fought Obama in the Congress, so for him it energizes him even to some extent, I would assume. It's not something that, with others, it's more important, because if we are able to convince enough people in the parliament from within the Likud that it's dangerous for the stability and for the future of Israel, it might help. Fourth thing, so I gave you three things up until now, concrete things, right? Fourth thing has to do with money. Your donations to Israel, your charity, wherever you do it, via federation or not via federation, because if you do it federation, so influence via federation. If you do it directly, it's also important. Make sure the donations coming from North America to Israel are invested in programs, in institutions that promote democracy, human rights, Jewish pluralism. My favorite is, of course, the Masorti movement in Israel that changes the world on ground in Israel. But, you know, there are other platforms as well. It's important. You know, the Israeli government will not invest in the Israeli society, in the civil society, in those organizations. It's important that money will be coming to those organizations, because it's the right way to do to influence in a very, very legitimate way. There are some federations, there are some organizations, there are many individuals who already decided to do so. Okay, we can buy our own ambulances. We can build recreation facilities to our soldiers. Okay, I'm not specifically talking about any organization, but you understood me. Okay, something that will not build itself from the government's budget is the civil society in Israel that so heavily needed that kind of support. So these are four things that can be done from your side. It has to be done vocally, bluntly, in a rapid pace, because the government is running. Okay, it's running and running. And if, God forbid, we are not successful, if indeed this legislation passes, we will be facing something that one can only imagine. I would assume that it will be taken to court. Someone will be appealing and it will be taken to court. And I think, I do not know, no one knows, but I think that the Supreme Court would cancel the legislation if they would think that it's not democratic. Now, this kind of clash between agencies, I'm not sure what is the right way it can be solved, because who would the chief of the police report to? Who would he bow to? To the court? To the government that was duly elected? To the court that duly said that it's not legit, to that legislation? The head of the IDF, the chief of staff, who would he report to? The head of the Mossad, the head of the Shin Bet? Serious, I don't envy with them. I'm sure that in their nightmares, they are awakened at night. Okay, when it happens, what do I do? It's a serious thing. And then to have elections, who could declare elections then? If it's not the government, who is it? The court? And who would implement elections? The Ministry of Internal Affairs that usually does elections, but without, it's part of the government. It brings a chaotic situation that, again, few democracies are solving those kinds of situations without bloodshed. If you come to think about these kinds of incidents in the last few decades in our world. I'm not sure. I'm optimistic, though, that the forces that we see now in Israel in the streets are powerful enough to make this government afraid from doing things that is not responsible. I'd like to hope that pressure from the outside, either from Jewish communities or from governments, Europeans and North American, would have its role too. Okay, this is significant. And the only comforted thing that I'd like to bring here before I'll open for discussions and questions, that as we know, Israel was in existential threats before. Yes, it was military kind of existential threats, and we survived. Okay, I feel that the winter of 2023 now is not less existential than the winter of 1973, of the Yom Kippur War. We survived the Yom Kippur War. I'd like to hope that we'll survive this winter. And I'm hoping for the good. I'm sorry if I was too emotional. This is the state of mind. Yes, let's open for discussion, please.
Concrete steps. You've heard giving money. Okay. What about see, that takes a little bit of time.
Right.
Concrete steps. Would it help if we addressed letters to people in government in Israel who are in these and address them by name and send a letter directly to Israel? Is that something that would be impactful? I mean, it may just get thrown in the trash, but because it's external, but nevertheless, is that something to do?
It is, but as we know, politics is always local. And therefore, I'm not sure that private letters would have the same impact. I would do it, therefore. I would do it to Dichter, to Gallant, to Edelstein. These would be the three ones that I would address letters to. Edelstein, he was the Speaker of the House. Now he's the head of the Vadat Chutz U'Bitachon, Security and Foreign Affairs Committee in the Knesset. Minister Dichter, he is the Minister of Agriculture, and Minister Gallant, he is the Minister of Defense. So defense, agriculture, and Edelstein. Yes, please.
Actually want to do what they want to do, how do you stop them? I mean, it doesn't matter what popular opinion is. It doesn't matter. They're in a position, and all of a sudden, they're in charge, and they decide to do what they want to do. I mean,
That's the problem. Exactly, that's the problem. So strong public opinion, internally and externally, might frighten the government to understand that there are limits to the power. And let's hope that it would hope, if not the court, and if not, God forbid. Yes, please.
to the extent that the issue is that Bibi doesn't want to go to the slammer. I wonder if the way around it to cut the Gordian knot isn't for the center left to cut a deal in which Bibi is promised
Yeah.
You give him a golden parachute. Because otherwise he can make all kinds of stories.
Where do I sign?
For the sake of the people on live
Yeah.
stream, would somebody ask?
Okay, so I was asked if someone would cut a deal with Netanyahu that he will not be taken to the what is a slammer? To the jail. That he will not be put in jail. That yeah, it could be. You know, this is a speculation that no one will be able to know if it works and to negotiate on. I don't know. It's too. Who knows? I'm for it. By the way. Yes, please.
What is the position of AIPAC? Because they have tremendous influence in Israel, and I haven't heard anything about that.
So AIPAC did have a delegation in Israel last week. It was a big delegation that came. I don't know. It was the national board. I don't know exactly what went in the. If you know, please share. Here you go. We have a headline.
Well, they met with.
Yeah. Important. So you need to come. Live report from the AIPA conference.
So I was just at the APAC Valley Executive Committee meeting before this. Donna Bender, who's on the national board, gave us a full report. And they met with everybody. They met with the opposition. They met with Netanyahu. APAC does things quietly, not yelling in the street or anything like that. And the feeling they got from everybody on both sides of this equation is that they will work it out. It will be worked out. And this will not be this, the way you described it, I would say is not the way they described it, coming back from Israel, that there will be a compromise, it will be worked out, and this will be solved.
You know, first of all, Halavai, and if it's solved, we will all be thanking God. One thing that it's hard to believe sometime, 5 minutes before a disaster, it's hard to believe that it's really a disaster. So I'd like to hope that indeed that is the feedback that they got from both coalition and opposition, and they will be able to solve it. I hope. Yeah. Yes, rega. Yes, in the end. Yeah.
The people didn't vote for such a coalition. So in my opinion, that's not the true democracy.
Well, it's
In order to have a true democracy, you have to have individual elections. That's a true democracy.
I'll address it in a second. I forgot. Daniel here has a sheet. If you want to keep in touch with me, I'll give my cards as well, because this dialogue is important. So write your name, and we'll make sure that we're communicating. And we'll leave the cards also there. So Daniel, if you could pass the sheet. Listen, what you said now, it's true that it doesn't reflect the way the American democratic system works. There are different kinds of democratic systems that are not less democratic. And I think that the coalition system in Israel has merits as much as pros as much as cons, okay? the fact that in order to have a coalition, you need to compromise. You need to come together not in a zero-sum game, but in a way that everyone is benefiting something, or at least the majority, different countries, different parties. I think it also serves the sentiment of the Israeli public in not a bad way. It's true that it means sometimes, and this is our obstacle, that a minority party has a power like nothing else. Okay? The minority that has the ability to give the prime minister the crown is sometimes a party that wins the jackpot. It's indeed an obstacle. I'm not sure that a zero-sum game would fit the Israeli society. The coalition system has merit, and as you can see, the Israeli governments via the coalitions signed peace agreements, went to wars. I think it works. I saw, yes, please. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, which organizations promote these values in Israel in a way that it's a good question. I think, it depends what bothers you the most. So really, the Masorti movement in Israel takes care of Jewish pluralism, of marriage and divorce and rights of converts, and the Kotel, the ability to pray at the Kotel. So that's the primary issues of state and religion that affect, and yes, the Masorti movement does promote civil marriage because this is the only way to. What? No, but when we're talking about civil marriage, it's civil marriage to everyone. You can then choose to marry in a religious way. So it would allow everyone to marry whomever they want. That's there are other organizations that promote shared society. In Israel, I can mention the Abraham Initiative Fund, which I like a lot. Na'amat, they also do things in shared society that is important to mention. The New Israel Fund does things of shared society that it's important to mention. Some of them are far to the left, some of them are only left, some of them are more centered, but this is definitely for you to choose. And when it comes to, I think these are the issues. Within the I mentioned the few. Yeah. Yes, please.
How does the vote come up again? If in money votes, he changed what the rules were after people voted. Can a small coalition party be picked off and get new elections? Is there any way of doing that to change the dynamic?
If one of the coalition parties leaves the coalition, it would happen. But it will not happen easily because once the coalition is under threat, and now according to the polls it's under threat, they stick together even more so because they are afraid that in the coming elections that they will lose their seats. So it works in an interesting way. It's not an easy for a coalition party to leave the coalition unless they feel, and it might happen that they will win more. Like there are some right-wing elements in this government, meaning ultra right-wing elements in this right-wing government, that if the government would not fulfill all its desires when it comes to the territories, to Judah and Samaria, they might leave the coalition and claim, hey, we will do it better and run. And I'm not sure. They are not at that stage. In this early stage of the government, they are sticking together because it looks like politically cleverness to do it this way. Yes, please.
So you mentioned comparing this to the Yom Kippur War. You mentioned comparing this to the Yom Kippur War, okay? We are indeed in a battle. You mentioned Kohelet, okay? Now, you've got Kohelet allied with Tikva, allied with Shalem, allied for, this has been going on for at least 15 years.
Exactly.
They have been strategic.
And you are knowledgeable. You know about Shalem and about Tikva Fund, yes? Okay.
They have been allied for 15 years with the goal of funding this with billions of dollars, with extraordinary creativity, strategy, with tentacles into absolutely everything. So when people are saying, what do we do in America? Everything you've mentioned, the members of the Congress, it's already happened. You've already got wealthy billionaires in America, and you've got J Street and the New Israel Fund and all these people who are getting the Congress to speak out and the president to speak out. You're mentioning,
I hope that AIPAC is doing it too.
okay,
Yeah?
I don't know, these are the people I
No, they're doing it discreetly, and that's fine.
everything you have mentioned has already been done. What hasn't been done is Amcha, who you folks represent for the World Zionist Organization. Amcha in the Galut has not been organized to raise their voices. People like me have no place to put my voice. You've got a room full of people here who are saying to you, what can we do so that our voices are heard? Because there are already leadership that's getting the rest of the people, the leadership of America, to be able to speak out, the leadership of the organizations. But you haven't had the power of the millions of American Jews who care about this, or even maybe a half a million, being able to be organized so that the Israeli government hears that there is a mass of American Jews who are on your side here with all of this.
So that's.
I want to finish. This is the community organizing work that you folks need to be doing rather than throwing out these solutions that are on the surface, a la shetach, that have already happened.
Yeah. So
If you want to win this battle, you got to organize the playing field against this huge monolith
Yeah.
that you're fighting against.
So, you know, it's never in the history of the Zionist movement that the vice chairman was talking to Jewish communities worldwide, talking the messages that I talked. I represent on the World Zionist Organization, as well as in the Israeli public, you know, your voice exactly on these issues. Now, unfortunately, I must say to unfortunately, and it has merit, okay? Unfortunately, the number of people in North America that voted for the last Zionist Congress is embarrassing. The right wing and the Haredim, they did vote. Our slate, Merkaz, in the last election got 15,000 votes in the US. The Reform Movement got 23,000 votes in the US. That's all. The Haredim that ran to the Congress for the first time got 25,000 votes. And they are working already for the next elections of 2025. So the mechanism that Herzl left us with is a vital political mechanism that allows the ability of you know, people who live in the Tfutzot, in the diaspora, not only to have a voice, but also a vote. Now, it has to do with monies, big time. It has to do with values, big time. I'll give you an example, okay? Under the World Zionist organization that Herzl founded, there are 3 daughter companies. One you know well, it's the or some of you know well, it's the Jewish Agency. Okay, the Jewish Agency, 50% of the board of governors of the Jewish Agency is the WZO, meaning the people that you voted or didn't vote for the Congress. 50% of the board of governors of Keren HaYesod, less relevant to North America. It's the fundraising arm of the Zionist movement outside of North America. It's WZO. But wait, 100% of the board of governors of KKL, meaning Keren Kayemet LiYisrael, JNF, it's the Congress. Now, the budget, the yearly budget of KKL, Keren Kayemet LiYisrael, is $2 billion. $2 billion. That money doesn't belong to the Israeli society, doesn't belong to the Israeli citizens, doesn't belong to the Israeli government. It belongs to the Israeli citizens as well as you. It belongs to the Jewish people. It's the money that, it's not donation money. It's the money from the land. 15% of the land of Israel belongs to Keren Kayemet LiYisrael, to KKL. And that money, when it's developed, the fruit come to KKL, and this money should be invested. Now, it gives you an example, and right now we are in a minority there because so many people did not vote. So the center left is a minority there. So these kinds of, it's important for me to engage with Masorti conservative congregations. It's important for the Reform movement to do the same in their congregations in order to make sure that in 2025 you have a voice, you have a vote, you have the ability to influence the Israel society. It's not the only way. Okay, I talked about the other ways that needs to be done. By the way, it's not being done enough. Okay, it's being done by leaders, by big organizations. It could be done in a better way. But your very practical way to be heard, it's my recommendation, is to vote for the next coming elections. It's January 25. It has time. Hopefully everything will be solved in Israel, at least temporarily, but it's a very practical way. I think that if you are standing, it's about time for me to end.
Let me in. Dr. Hess has had a long day, and he came to us at the end, so we just want to be respectful. But there is a way of continuing this conversation, which, of course, is Daniel, who's over there. Daniel actually just wrote a very interesting piece in the Times of Israel in the blog, so you should check out. Daniel, what's your last name again? Daniel Livingston. And so he wrote a perspective on the reforms and from his own political orientation. I think you would find it very interesting. It's in the Times of Israel blogs. Please sign up for further information. And we want to thank Dr. Hess for schlepping out here in the rain in Los Angeles. When there's Geshem, it's Angeles for the sun. That's right, exactly. So we want to thank everybody for coming this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome to Armenia. We met when I was on the Suffolk, Father Nemanim. Yeah, I was. Yaakov Neman accused me of firing the first shot in the Civil War of the Jews because I